area. Knowing and explaining, they say, are not the same thing. What's the secret? There's only one, I think. Don't talk to the general audience as you would to your scientific colleagues. There are terms that convey your meaning instantly and accurately to fellow experts. You may pass these phrases every day in your professional work, but they do no more than mystify an audience of non-specialists. Use the simplest possible language. Above all, remember how it was before you yourself grasped whatever it is you're explaining. Remember the misunderstandings that you almost fell into, and note them explicitly. Keep firmly in mind that there was a time when you didn't understand any of this either. Recapitulate the first steps that led you from ignorance to knowledge. Never forget that native intelligence is widely distributed in our species. Indeed, it is the secret of our success. The effort involved is slight, the benefits great. Among the potential pitfalls are oversimplification, the need to be sparing with qualifications and quantifications, inadequate credit given to the many scientists involved, and insufficient distinctions drawn between helpful analogy and reality. Doubtless, compromises must be made. The more you make such presentations, the clearer it is which approaches work and which do not. There is a natural selection of metaphors, images, analogies, anecdotes. After a while, you find that you can get almost anywhere you want to go, walking on consumer-tested stepping stones. You can then fine-tune your presentations for the needs of a given audience. Like some editors and television producers, some scientists believe the public is too ignorant or too stupid to understand science, that the enterprise of popularization is fundamentally a lost cause, or even that it's tantamount to fraternization, if not outright cohabitation, with the enemy. Among the many criticisms that could be made of this judgment, along with its insufferable arrogance and its neglect of a host of examples of highly successful science popularizations, is that it is self-confirming, and also, for the scientists involved, self-defeating. There is no single solution to the problem of illiteracy in science, or math, history, English, geography, and many of the other skills which our society needs more of. The responsibilities are broadly shared. Parents, the voting public, local school boards, the media, teachers, administrators, federal, state and local governments, plus of course the students themselves. At every level, teachers complain that the problem lies in earlier grades, and first-grade teachers can with justice despair of teaching children with learning deficits because of malnutrition, or no books in the home, or a culture of violence in which the leisure to think is unavailable. I know very well from my own experience how much a child can benefit from parents who have a little learning and are able to pass it on. Even small improvements in the education, communication skills and passion for learning in one generation might work much larger improvements in the next. I think of this every time I hear a complaint that school and collegiate standards are falling, or that a bachelor's degree doesn't mean what it once did. At the same time, children with special abilities and skills need to be nourished and encouraged. They are a national treasure. Challenging programs for the gifted are sometimes decried as elitism. Why aren't intensive practice sessions for varsity football, baseball and basketball players and inter-school competition deemed elitism? After all, only the most gifted athletes participate. There is a self-defeating double standard at work here, nationwide. In the closing years of the Soviet Union, Andrian and I found ourselves at a dinner in Peredelkino, a village outside Moscow, where Communist Party officials, retired generals, and a few favored intellectuals had their summer homes. The air was electric with the prospect of new freedoms, especially the right to speak your mind, even if the government doesn't like what you're saying. The fabled revolution of rising expectations was in full flower. But despite glasnost, there were widespread doubts. Would those in power really allow their own critics to be heard? Would freedom of speech, of assembly, of the press, of religion really be permitted? Would people inexperienced with freedom be able to bear its burdens? Some of the Soviet citizens present at the dinner had fought, for decades and against long odds, for the freedoms that most Americans take for granted. Indeed, they had been inspired by the American experiment, a real-world demonstration that nations, even multicultural and multi-ethnic nations, could survive and prosper with these freedoms reasonably intact. They went so far as to raise the possibility that prosperity was due to freedom, that in an age of high technology and swift change, the two rise or fall together, that the openness of science and democracy, their willingness to be judged by experiment, were closely allied ways of thinking. There were many toasts, as there always are at dinners in that part of the world. The most memorable was given by a world-famous Soviet novelist. He stood up, raised his glass, looked us in the eye and said, "To the Americans, they have a little freedom." He paused a beat and then added, "And they know how to keep it." Do we? The ink was barely dry on the Bill of Rights before politicians found a way to subvert it, by cashing in on fear and patriotic hysteria. In 1798, the ruling Federalist Party knew that the button to push was ethnic and cultural prejudice. Exploiting tensions between France and the US, and a widespread fear that the French and Irish immigrants were somehow intrinsically unfit to be Americans, the Federalists passed a set of laws that have come to be known as the Alien and Sedition Acts. One law upped the residency requirement for citizenship from 5 to 14 years. Citizens of French and Irish origin usually voted for the opposition, Thomas Jefferson's Democratic-Republican Party. The Alien Act gave President John Adams the power to deport any foreigner who aroused his suspicions. Making the president nervous, said a member of Congress, is the new crime. The Sedition Act made it unlawful to publish false or malicious criticism of the government or to inspire opposition to any of its acts. Some 24 arrests were made, 10 people were convicted, and many more were censored or intimidated into silence. The act attempted, Jefferson said, to crush all political opposition by making criticism of Federalist officials or policies a crime. As soon as Jefferson was elected, indeed in the first week of his presidency in 1801, he began pardoning every victim of the Sedition Act because, he said, it was as contrary to the spirit of American freedoms as if Congress had ordered us all to fall down and worship a golden calf. By 1802, none of the Alien and Sedition Acts remained on the books. From across 2 centuries, it's hard to recapture the frenzied mood that made the French and the wild Irish seem so grave a threat that we were willing to surrender our most precious freedoms. Giving credit for French and Irish cultural triumphs, advocating equal rights for them, was in effect decried in conservative circles as sentimental, unrealistic political correctness. But that's how it always works. It always seems an aberration later. But by then, we're in the grip of the next hysteria. Those who seek power at any price detect a societal weakness, a fear that they can ride into office. It could be ethnic differences, as it was then, perhaps different amounts of melanin in the skin, different philosophies or religions, or maybe it's drug use, violent crime, economic crisis, school prayer, or desecrating, literally making unholy, the flag. Whatever the problem, the quick fix is to shave a little freedom off the Bill of Rights. Yes, in 1942, Japanese Americans were protected by the Bill of Rights, but we locked them up anyway. After all, there was a war on. Yes, there are constitutional prohibitions against unreasonable search and seizure, but we have a war on drugs and violent crime is racing out of control. Yes, there's freedom of speech, but we don't want foreign authors here spouting alien ideologies, do we? The pretexts change from year to year, but the result remains the same, concentrating more power in fewer hands and suppressing diversity of opinion, even though experience plainly shows the dangers of such a course of action. If we do not know what we're capable of, we cannot appreciate measures taken to protect us from ourselves. It is a fact of life on our beleaguered little planet that widespread torture, famine, and governmental criminal irresponsibility are much more likely to be found in tyrannical than in democratic governments. Why? Because the rulers of the former are much less likely to be thrown out of office for their misdeeds than the rulers of the latter. This is error-correcting machinery in politics. The methods of science, with all its imperfections, can be used to improve social, political, and economic systems, and this is, I think, true no matter what criterion of improvement is adopted. How is this possible if science is based on experiment? Humans are not electrons or laboratory rats. But every act of Congress, every Supreme Court decision, every presidential national security